Hi everyone, I know it's been a little while since I filmed. This past month actually got kind of crazy, but I got new bookshelves, which is really exciting. My husband and I built them all by ourselves without any help from anybody that knew what they were doing, so that was a very exciting full day of building. We did do a little bit of baking while we were doing the building, so that probably slowed things down a little bit. But I'm really excited to have new bookshelves. I think it looks nicer. Hopefully, it might take me a little while to figure out how to set up the camera and make it look right. But at the end of this video, after I do a short wrap up of what I read in February, I will do a quick bookshelf tour, which is something that I've never wanted to do before because our other bigger bookshelf is in the bedroom and it's kind of a tighter space and it's also kind of a mess. I mean, the bookshelf, well, the bedroom is also kind of a mess. Anyway, today will be my first ever bookshelf tour, which hopefully will make up for the fact that I am not doing a March TBR today. Because I got so busy the last few weeks, there's actually still a ton of stuff that I want to read that was on my February TBR, and I don't really feel like talking about all that today. I'm just gonna do my best to get it done in the next few weeks, and maybe then I will just buck convention and do like a mid-March TBR and pick a few things from the Magic Hat because I got a lot of really awesome suggestions last month for stuff I can put into my Magic Hat to do my random TBR game draw thing. I don't really know what it is. It's not really a game. Anyway, I do want to do some sort of TBR for March, but I just also want to finish a few things up, and most of what I put on my February TBR that I didn't get to yet, I still do actually want to read. So I did read, I think, 7 books in February, which is not that bad, although some of them were kind of short. It's just I sort of wildly diverged from my TBR, and I do that sometimes, but usually when I do, I have enough reading time that I also read the stuff on my TBR, but this time it was just a little bit all over the place. But I'll do my usual wrap up. I didn't prepare any statistics today because I forgot and I've been busy and I just didn't think about it when I was setting up for this video, but I'll just go through what I read in February, going from my least favorite to most favorite reads, and then we'll end with a quick look at these bookshelves. So the first thing I read in February was actually a carryover from my January TBR, which gives you a sign that it was a book I've been putting off for a while, and that is The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. This was the 3rd book in the Poppy War trilogy. I've always struggled with mixed feelings, I guess I would say, about the Poppy War trilogy because I overall really liked and respected the first 2 books, and I also just kind of had a negative reaction whenever I read them. Like, I was glued to them, but I also just felt pretty disturbed, and admittedly, I'm not that much of a grimdark reader in general, and as you may know if you're familiar with the Poppy War trilogy, it does get quite dark, quite graphic, and it was just, a little bit much for my squeamish stomach at times. But then again, I know a lot of the stuff that was in there was drawn from actual history and actual things that do happen. So I didn't necessarily feel like the author was doing it just to be gratuitous, but it was quite hard to read, and I was always glad that I had about a year in between books. So when it was time to read The Burning God, I just found myself kind of putting it off. And in general this past year, especially the last few months, I've found myself just avoiding things that I know are going to be kind of unpleasant, and I think it might just kind of be like an emotional reaction to the way the world is right now and just how things have been, and I've just had more of a desire probably for just escapism and not to read about bad things happening to people. I don't know, that's my best guess. I've always been a little on the sensitive side, but I feel like it's been more so the past year, so I'm just kind of trying to go with that. Anyway, I really put off reading The Burning God because I think I knew what it would be like, and then I just honestly didn't really enjoy reading it. From what I've seen, some people really enjoyed it and others found it to be kind of a letdown compared to the rest of the trilogy. I didn't really feel either way. I just didn't really enjoy the experience of reading it very much. I feel like even by the end of the Poppy War, if you know what happened at the end of the Poppy War, you just get this sense of like, where's the author gonna go from here? How do you possibly go anywhere after these horrific events? And then the series just kind of continues, and I really, especially in the last book, just felt like every single character in the book, except for maybe one character, was just an awful, unredeemable person, and I hated them all, and I also cared about them and didn't want anything bad to happen to them. So between those 2 things, it was just a difficult book for me to get through, and this trilogy just isn't really for me right now. The next book I'll talk about is called The Dragon Waiting by John M. Ford. I honestly don't know entirely why I decided to read this book. I checked it out from the library and it was about to, expire from the library, and so I just decided to read it, and it was just a really odd book. This is a re-release of a book that I think it was published in the 80s, I'd have to check, but it was out of print for a little while because the author unexpectedly passed away, and apparently there were some issues with his estate. So apparently this book is kind of a cult classic in some ways. I didn't really know anything about it going in, and the description was extremely confusing. But the way it was set up was that the first 3 chapters were each almost like a novella about one of the main characters of the book, but then in the 4th chapter, suddenly you have all those 3 characters suddenly after a time skip in the same place, except they're all in disguise, so you don't know who anyone is and you don't really know what's going on. And I think I reread chapter 4 several times just to try to figure out who everyone was and what was going on. I'm a person, I really like confusing books. I like not knowing what's going on. I know that's not for everyone, but personally, I kind of enjoy that experience in a story. I like getting to uncover things and experience a sense of mystery and confusion. But this book was just, honestly, I think it was over my head. I saw some people and some authors that I really respect who really like this book, so I would be willing to try it again. Maybe someday, I don't know, we'll see. The premise is actually pretty interesting. It's set in the, I think, 15th or maybe 16th century, but in a world where Christianity never rose to the forefront, and the Byzantine Empire is kind of a major superpower and is trying to conquer the rest of Europe and the world and everything. And just because Christianity never rose to prominence, there are all these different old religions that people still follow. And also there are vampires, but they're definitely not sparkly modern vampires. They are pretty creepy vampires. So it's kind of set during the Wars of the Roses, except also Byzantium is trying to conquer, Europe. And I don't know, it's just a very strange book. It's confusing. I found a whole fan site that's dedicated to unraveling this book, and I don't know, part of me, I think it's probably genius, but it just was not really for me this past month. I just rarely had the experience of feeling so confused while reading something in that particular way, and also just not really feeling drawn into it at all. But I do kind of admire the mind of the person that created that whole thing, because it was kind of nuts. And while I do have a basic knowledge of the Wars of the Roses, I think my just knowledge of history maybe wasn't even deep enough to fully appreciate what the author was doing. I did spend some quality time on Wikipedia trying to sort out who all the Yorks and Plantagenets and everyone were, though, so that was a good history review. I think I talked about the first Lord Peter Wimsey mystery by Dorothy Sayers in last month's wrap-up, and I listened to 2 more of these mysteries this past month. The first one I listened to was Clouds of Witness, which is book 2, and then I listened to Unnatural Death, which is book 3. I felt kind of the same about both of them. This series has been off to a very slow start for me. It is a reread. I think the reason I keep listening is because just the performance of the audiobooks and the narrator and the accents, it's just very enjoyable and entertaining. Dorothy Sayers has a ton of sort of dry social humor and dry wit and, observations about people, and that's the kind of thing I find very funny. The stories themselves are kind of okay. I think I mentioned when I was talking about the first book that I just find the books a little bit oddly enthusiastic about the British aristocracy in a very kind of dated way, but also there is something really charming, and I just kind of do feel this attachment to the characters. So I don't know. I don't think these books so far are great, but it was kind of a nice escape. Each one was pretty short. In Clouds of Witness, Lord Peter's brother, the Duke of Denver, is wrongfully accused of murder, And so he's trying to figure out who the real culprit was, basically. And then in the second one that I listened to, called Unnatural Death, Lord Peter is suspicious that the perfect crime has been committed, which is basically a murder with no detectable signs that the death was a murder, and also no detectable motive. So he gets kind of obsessed with proving that this was in fact a crime. I don't know. I remember this series being better than I'm finding it to be on reread. But I also for some reason just have this level of nostalgia and affection for it, so I'm probably going to keep going for now. I don't think there are any more on audiobook that I can listen to, so I'll probably have to switch to actually reading. So I'll see if once I don't have that narrator, if I'll still be as motivated to keep reading the series. The thing is with the audiobooks is at a certain point some of them exist as like BBC radio dramas instead of just audiobooks, and I really don't feel enthusiastic about listening to an audio dramatization of something. I've just always found that format very odd. So we'll see how this goes. Next, I'll just mention another reread, which is very quick. I've mentioned before that Diana Wynne Jones is one of my favorite authors. She because she's not alive anymore. She wrote mostly middle grade and young adult. They're kind of classic, clever British children's fantasy mostly. And so this volume has two books from the Crestomancy series. I read one of them, The Magicians of Caprona. Actually, both of the books in this volume are probably my least favorite Crestomancy books. There's maybe like 5 or 6 of them, and these two are the ones that have the least Crestomancy. Crestomancy is this enchanter who works for the British government in kind of an alternate world. It's set in kind of a multiverse setting, and his job is basically to prevent the misuse of magic and deal with magical criminals and things like that. So the 2 books that are in this volume just have the least of the main characters from the series out of any books. They're kind of more loosely related standalones. So I enjoyed reading The Magicians of Caprona. It was just a really quick, comforting middle grade reread, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a place to start with Diana Wynne Jones. So everything I've talked about so far ranged kind of from wasn't that into it to kind of neutral, but now we'll get into a couple of books that I actually did really enjoy this past month. I read Range by David Epstein. This was a book that my husband put into the magic hat for my TBR draw as, well, I don't think it was entirely a joke, but this is actually a book that my father has been trying to get me and probably everyone else to read for years and years and years. And I honestly did intend to do it. It just is a combination of that I don't read very much nonfiction these days, and also as an adult, when your parents are just telling you to do things, sometimes you kind of have the intention of doing it because you know they're right, but then it just kind of doesn't happen. I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience, but I have. This is actually a really, really interesting book, and overall quite enjoyable to read. I just haven't been a big nonfiction reader in a few years. I just always feel like reading fiction. I think also my husband listens to and reads a lot of nonfiction, and I always feel like he can just kind of fill me in on the information I need to know, and I can just spend my time reading fiction instead. But the concept behind this book is basically that hyper-specialization is not always the best way to go, whether it is in sports or in other disciplines, or just in people being able to draw on a broader base of knowledge and experiences to make decisions either in business or in science. So in some ways it's a very inspiring and reassuring book for anyone that feels like they don't have one passion in life or they don't know exactly what they're doing. There are a lot of examples in this book of people that just through kind of following their own path did some really remarkable things. It's interesting to me, coming from a field, classical music, where we do lean towards hyper-specialization and people do often start studying music at a very, very early age, and that's kind of addressed in this book as well. That was actually, in my mind, probably the weakest chapter. My husband and I kind of agreed. We felt like his conclusions were perfectly good, but just the way he got there in that chapter didn't quite work for us. But other than that, I think this book is well worth the read. It's just under 300 pages, and it's written in a very accessible style. So I think if you have any interest in reading this kind of nonfiction in general, I would definitely recommend checking out this book. Probably my favorite book that I read last month was A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine, which I had as an e-arc, and I am planning to film a review of that very, very soon. In fact, probably in a few minutes after I finish this video, so I won't talk about it too much, but it's the sequel to a memory called Empire, and overall, I very much enjoyed it. I read it in about a few hours, I think. I definitely read it in one sitting. I had actually just reread a memory called Empire in January, which I was very glad for, and I was really excited for a Desolation called Peace. This is actually the first arc that I had ever received, so that was pretty exciting for me as well, because the book is coming out tomorrow as of filming, March 2nd. So I'll talk more about this book in the review, but overall it was a really good sequel, really interesting book. I still think Arkady Martine is a fantastic writer, and I'm looking forward to seeing whatever she writes next. I'm kind of not sure after finishing A Desolation Called Peace if there will be any more books in this series or not, but I kind of hope there will be, because she explored some really interesting things in A Desolation Called Peace, and I feel like there's room for more with these characters and in this setting. So that's everything I read in February, as I went totally off script with my TBR, and now I'm going to try to get myself back on track. But now we're going to cut to a short bookshelf tour, which I'm going to film on my phone, so please excuse any difference in video quality. Okay, hi everyone. Here we have my new bookshelves. This is probably the first time since before I was in college that I've actually had really the space and time and energy to have real proper bookshelves. So this is a really exciting moment for me, because bookshelves and just being surrounded by a lot of books have always just been kind of a nesting thing for me. This makes me feel comfortable and at home. You guys can see there's still plenty of empty space here. I actually have another bookshelf in our bedroom that is a little bit taller than these and a little bit narrower, and that's where most of my unread books are. But I wanted to put mostly books I liked out here, and now that we're a little bit more settled and I'm not moving around constantly like I did in my 20s, I can really start acquiring more books, which if you've watched any of my book hauls, you can see I've been doing. So here, obviously, we have the Brandon Sanderson shelf. I am still really regretting. I only owned The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance on Kindle before this year, and I wanted to have them physically, so I ended up getting The Way of Kings in mass market paperback and Words of Radiance in the big floppy paperback, which I really regret. I wish I had 3 that were the same size. And I have my 2 leather bounds here. Probably more of these will be joining the shelf when we get a chance. You can see where I was in my life when I got different books, because you can see the Shadows of Self and Bands of Mourning I ordered when they came out, because I was buying more physical books already then. And Alloy of Law I only had on Kindle, so I bought that this year as well. Same with Warbreaker and those Mistborn books. Then down here we have City of Brass, basically the whole Daevabad trilogy. We have the Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth. Here are my Wheel of Time books. I just got given book 3 and book 9 by a friend that he didn't want them anymore, and I'm reading book 2 right now. So I need to keep acquiring the rest of these. This is probably going to end up being a whole shelf eventually, because there's so many of them. And then those Lord of the Rings books, the individual bound ones, are my husband's, and that Lord of the Rings leather bound, which I showed off in my last book haul video, is that's mine from when I was a teenager. Then the Name of the Wind 10th anniversary edition I got for my husband as a present a couple years ago. And Call to Adventure is the Stormlight Archive game, which we need to play again sometime soon. Down here, this is a more random assortment of books. Actually, what's really driving me crazy about these shelves, this is the first time in my life that I have a bookshelf that is not alphabetized, and I still feel like it's a little bit criminal to have a bookshelf that is sorted by anything other than just alphabetical by last name of author. But on the other hand, since I was getting bookshelves, I wanted it to look nice when I filmed. So down here, I think I showed these off also in a book haul was kind of a book haul video about books that I bought when I was a teenager that I got shipped to me rather than buying now. So this is the complete works of Shakespeare. They are here on the bottom shelf because they are pretty heavy, and I know it will eventually like warp the shelves if I have too much weight on them. That's why also, hopefully this isn't sounding terrible, but I'm sliding along the floor. I have all my cookbooks down here. I don't talk about it on booktube videos, but I really like to cook and bake, like everyone this past year. These are notebooks that I've collected. I have a bit of a notebook and stationery obsession, and I wonder how common that actually is in book people. Then moving up, we have, these are all the Amelia Peabody series. I do not have them in order yet. And then we have some Agatha Christie's. So this shelf is thematic. This is a shelf of all mysteries. And then here also we have some science fiction, mostly. I have all the Miles Verkosigan books, and then the Chalian and Paladin of Souls by Lois McMaster Bujold are fantasy, but I wanted to have all the Bujold books together. I really wish the Miles books looked prettier because I love them so much, but they're just, the covers and even the spines were not that great to look at. So here's some other science fiction. These are some things. A few of them I haven't read yet, and then others I just wasn't so crazy about. And then all the way up here, we have the Phantom Tollbooth. I'm not sure why. This was one of my favorite books when I was little, and I just felt like sticking it on there. But these shelves will be getting filled out eventually. I'm still figuring out how this is all going to look, but it's been fun arranging it. Let's see. This is how we zoom out. I'm walking backwards. Ta-da! So those are the books that I have out here anyway. Thanks for watching. I am very open to suggestions for how to organize since I've, become a heretic and I'm not alphabetizing my books anymore. I hope you guys enjoyed the bookshelf tour. The whole thing is definitely still a work in progress, and I'm sure I'm going to rearrange it after I see how it actually looks on this video, because this is the first time I'm filming with that backdrop. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.